So, there was this TV interview recently, and it's kicked off a massive debate about a really fundamental question. Who was actually in charge of the UK's economy? Is it the politicians we elect, or is it this powerful, mysterious force we call the bond market? Let's get into it. And it really all kicked off with this one quote from the Green Party leader, Zach Polanski. He went on TV and challenged an idea that's been at the heart of British politics for decades, an idea that, as we're about to see, is completely misleading. This is the perfect place for us to start busting some myths.
So picture this. You're watching the BBC's big Sunday politics show. And instead of the usual shouting and political point scoring, you've got Zach Polanski just calmly taking apart the economic rules that have dominated UK policy for as long as most of us can remember. It was a moment that forced a conversation most politicians try to avoid at all costs.
I mean, you know the story we're always told, right? That the country has to tighten its belt like a family, that we can't afford things because we'll spook the markets, that we're in debt up to our eyeballs, and so tough choices, which, let's be honest, always means cuts, are the only option. Well, this is the story that Polanski just flat out challenged. Okay, so let's tackle the big one first. This idea that a country's budget is just like your household budget. It sounds simple, it sounds like common sense, but it is fundamentally completely wrong. And it's a mistake that leads to some really damaging policies. And here's why it's wrong. Think about it like this. You and me, we are users of pounds. We have to earn money or borrow it before we can spend it. The UK government is totally different. It is the issuer of the pound. It literally spends money into existence. A government that controls its own currency can never, ever go bankrupt in that currency. It's just a completely different ballgame. All right, so what about the other big boogeyman in this story, the markets? We're constantly told that politicians are terrified of them, but who or what are they really? It's time to pull back the curtain. To really get who the markets are, you've got to ask a really simple question. When the UK government borrows money by selling bonds, or gilts as they're called, who's actually buying them? Who do we owe all this money to? And let me tell you, the answer might actually surprise you. Okay, so check this out. A whopping 25%, a full quarter of the UK's entire national debt, is owned by our very own central bank, the Bank of England. That's basically the government owing money to itself. And look at the next biggest chunk, British pension and insurance funds. These aren't wild speculators. They're super stable, long-term investors looking for the safest possible place for their money. And get this, that tiny little sliver, that's the amount owned by regular people like you and me, just 0.1%. So this whole story about a country of lenders who might get nervous and pull their cash, it just doesn't stack up. The whole thing is not about our savings. So what does this all tell us? Well, this whole picture of a market full of jittery speculators ready to panic at any moment, it's just not true. The main players are actually institutions that need government bonds to be safe and stable. It's the foundation of their business. So you might be thinking, if the markets aren't this big, scary monster, why do they freak out sometimes? Well, it turns out it's not really about how much a government borrows. It's about why it's borrowing. And it all comes down to one thing, credibility. And that leads us to a really crucial idea here, something called fiscal credibility. Now, this has nothing to do with making cuts or so-called tough choices. It's simply about the markets believing you have a grown-up, coherent plan that you can explain clearly and that your borrowing will actually make the economy stronger. And this is the perfect example of that in action. Let's compare two moments, right? During the pandemic, the UK government borrowed an eye-watering £300 billion, but the markets totally calm. Why? Because there was a clear, credible plan, save the economy from collapse. Now, compare that to Liz Truss's mini-budget. The goal was unfunded tax cuts, there was zero credible plan, and the result was absolute chaos. See the difference? It was never about the amount of debt. It was about having a sensible plan versus, well, pure incompetence. And that is exactly the point Zach Polanski was making in that interview. He drew this brilliant, clear line between the reckless borrowing of the Truss government for tax giveaways and his proposal, which is borrowing to invest in things like green infrastructure, stuff that creates real assets and boosts the economy for the long haul. So, when you put all this together, what's the big takeaway? It's that the so-called limits on what a government can spend, they're not some unbreakable law of economics. They are political choices, and they're often based on myths designed to benefit a select few. And hey, don't just take our word for it. Look at what economists like Daniela Gabor are saying. She points out that austerity is always what the big bond investors want, but she warns that actually listening to them and doing what they want can be incredibly damaging for economic growth. So here's the real power dynamic. When you boil it all down, the government is sovereign. It's in the driving seat, not the markets. The real threat isn't going bankrupt. It's the markets creating a political crisis by jacking up interest rates. But even that can be managed if you have a credible, competent plan. So the real decision isn't about economics. It's about priorities. Whose interests come first, the public's or the financiers'?
And that really leaves us with one final and pretty profound question. Once you strip away all the myths and the fear-mongering, you realize the debate about government debt isn't really about economics at all. It's about democracy. Who gets to decide the future of this country? The government that we all elect, or the unelected financiers whose wish list has been treated as gospel for far too long?